Welcome to everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today on this panel, which is Womanhood, Representation, Participation, and Leadership. And so our panel today explores the complexities of African womanhood, which center the intersection of the personal. So today we will consideration of how women's identities are formed and later translate decision-making spaces. Panelists will consider the evolution of the African womanhood and how it is currently, how its changing nature has influenced the role of women in the African society today. And then at the very end, panelists will be requested or asked to share their vision of a genuinely inclusive continent, help us visualize the kind of a dream that we see for the centrally placed in our continent. So welcome once again. We're really excited to have. Hope that it's going to be a very interactive panel, learn a lot from each other, and we're really honored to be joined today by panelists today, very well accomplished women that I would like to start by introducing. And first and foremost, I'd like to introduce Dr. Wunpini Fatimata Mohammed. So Dr. Wunpini is a Ghanaian feminist activist, scholar, and journalist. She is an assistant professor of global media at the University of Georgia. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Wunpini. Looking forward to speaking more. And then I'd like to also introduce Buhle Ngaba, who is a multi-award-winning actress, writer, speaker, and activist. She studied acting and contemporary performance at Rhodes University and processes of performance at the University of Leeds here in the UK. She performed in the world premiere of John Carney's play Missing at the Bar Theatre in South Africa and went on to tour internationally with the production, earning her national nominations for Best Supporting Actress for both the Flou du Cap Theatre Awards and Naledi Theatre Awards. Welcome so much, Buhle. We're really excited to have you with us today. And then I would also like to introduce Stella Nyanzi. Stella is a multiple award-winning medical anthropologist with specialization in sexual and reproductive health, sexual rights, and human sexualities in Ghana. She self-identifies as a radical queer feminist, social justice activist, human rights defender, non-violent protester, which I very much like, poet, Facebook opposition, and politician belonging to the Forum for Democratic Change, FDC, and a former aspirant of Kampala Woman Member of Parliament in 2020-2021. Welcome, Stella. We're really honored to have you here, and thank you for joining us. And then Seehaam Samaai is a practicing lawyer since 2001 and identifies as a feminist lawyer and activist. She holds a B.Proc and LLM degree in constitutional litigation from UWC. She is the current director of Women's Legal Center, an African feminist legal center that advances women's rights and equality through strategic litigation, advocacy, and education. She also serves on various national leadership, legal, programmatic, or organizational support. So thank you so much for joining us today, Seehaam. Thank you to our panelists. I just realized that I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Irene. I am a student at the London School of Economics and currently an Atlantic Fellow for social and economic equity, and I'm really happy to be with you here. So we will move on right to introducing to talk to us about what they think about today's main topic in the context of the global, of the general theme of the LSE summit. So you have the floor. It's a free for all. So I welcome you to make a few comments about our talk today, and welcome. I'll request Seehaam because she's the first on my screen, so I can go ahead and Seehaam to start.
Thank you so much, Irene. I mean, 5 minutes. I think I'm going to speak about the women that, and I know that our topic is obviously about our Africanness, and also feminism. But you know what, at the end of the day, I think it's important to be able to speak to the lockdown as well as COVID and what it has come out in terms of women and organizing, but also without romanticizing the struggles of women. I think it's very important because throughout what we have seen in South Africa is that the state of disaster, women have been ensuring that our agricultural sector, our economic sector, as well as the education sector continues, and I'm just specifically continues to operate. And many have done so in working conditions where their health and safety have not been prioritized. So I think it's very important to note that what during a particular period, what COVID and lockdown has done is that we have realized, or at least seen, that the feminist leadership come from our communities, whether or not it is our mothers, whether or not it's our aunts, whether or not it is our children, our young girls, etc. And I think it's very important because what it has shown us is that our Africanness is situated within our communities, and also it's situated within the women that have carried us through this particular process. So women, I would say, and allied, continue to strive towards giving life to feminist realities of empowerment and leadership that they want to see. And that is what we have seen by working with women on the ground, and to be able to ensure that there's food security, to be able to ensure that children go to school, etc. And they have been at the forefront of also challenging the corruption in various countries, and also exposing the genuine impact that corruption, the lack of accountability and impunity has on the women's ability to work in a safe and protected environment. So we continue to speak up about their communities and the natural resources that are currently being exploited by private interests in collaboration with governments and private sector. And I think that women have met the challenge, but I'm going to say again, without romanticizing, but they have met the challenge head on to manage working from home while at the same time providing care, education for their children as well as families. The burden of unpaid care work has weighed heavily on the shoulders of women in our countries and over the past few months. And now have been more proactive than our grandmothers, than our mothers, who have intergenerationally have cared for and nurtured the children of their children. And the COVID-19 pandemic has added to the vulnerability as they face the higher risk of both death, illness, and various complications. So I'm going to say this, I know my 5 minutes is up, but I'm going to say that patriarchy has deep, deep roots. And the number of women experiencing the challenges of patriarchy on different levels, in terms of violence, in terms of their body, in terms of their private spaces, as well as public spaces. We say at the end of the day, women's bodies have continued to be objectified as the outlet for men's anger and beyond. And toxic masculinity is a reality that every woman in our country and in our continent and also globally have to face, whether she leaves the home, because we cannot speak about a broader identity, even if we don't speak about the challenges of violence and also the fear factory that women have to live with on a daily basis on the continent. So women are the ones who have created shelters. Women are the ones that have created safety for each other at times when care and protection by the state or even in terms of their home has not been provided. So I'm going to say, and just leave it and say that let us remember during this period, as history unfolds, that the feminist leadership that we are looking for has arrived and they are here. We need to be able to see how is it that we will be able to ensure that the voices of those women reaches the platforms so that they can use their own system, their own identity, to be able to shift the challenges which is in their home, in their community, or even in their churches, in their mosques, in their communities, as well as the various structures. I'm going to leave it there, but I just wanted to show that this is the African woman. This is the woman that organizes. We are not just organizers, we are mothers, we are sisters, we are workers, we are unpaid care workers. And we need to be able to realize that. And how do we navigate and ensure that that is recognized? So thank you, Irene. I know that I've gone way over my time, but this is a topic that I just love. Thank you.
Thank you so much for expressing the passion, and not just expressing your passion in this topic, but also saying about topics that are very pertinent to us as African women and as women in general. And I'm really happy that we're here to discuss some of these things, especially the issue of social reproduction and how that has looked like in this COVID-19 space. So thank you so much. I'm already feeling empowered. Next, we would like to hear from Dr. Wonpini. Thank you. You have the floor now. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me here today. So first of all, I just want to acknowledge, all the people who are present today and to thank them for joining this conversation. And I also want to acknowledge, and I like to do this a lot, acknowledge my ancestors on whose back I have, ridden and have tried to build on the work that they've done. So when we talk about womanhood, I am particularly interested in so many of the things that Seehaam said, and the fact that women were specifically affected by the COVID-19 pandemic and the ways in which that sort of further marginalized or oppressed women. But I want to first of all talk about African womanhood and what that means. So when we talk about African womanhood, we tend to limit that to the cis heteropatriarchal, capitalist, heteronormative systems that have been left over from colonial systems, and that tends to be very harmful. And I'm very interested in this specifically because in the last 2 months, there has been a lot of violence towards queer and trans Ghanaians, state-sanctioned violence, violence in media reportage, violence from the legal system of Ghana, violence from social and educational institutions, and even violence from the health sector, where they talk about queerness being a mental disorder, mental health disorder. So it's really important to me that when we talk about womanhood today on this panel, we don't reproduce these oppressive systems, and then we don't reproduce these harms that we've tended to do even in our feminist organizing and even in the work that we've done in feminist theorizing. I'm also interested in how gender oppression is not unique to Africa alone. I'm happy that we are looking at it within the African context, but I also want to say that it is a global phenomenon that we are all struggling with. And so in as much as we talk about gender oppression in Africa, it's important for us to also connect these liberation struggles to liberation struggles that are happening, say, in America among Black American communities, in indigenous communities globally, and also in global South communities in general. And I also want to talk about the exploitation of women. So when we talk about feminism, a lot of the times is the people who have a lot of cultural capital or social capital, a lot of privileges, who tend to dominate these conversations. And I want us to sort of, when we have these conversations, think about how the most marginalized are particularly affected by the things we are dealing with today. And when we talk about marginalized women, we're talking about, disabled women, women with disabilities. We're talking about queer and trans women. We're talking about poor women, rural women, women who don't necessarily have a formal education. And I hope that from this panel, our conversations will try and draw on our indigenous knowledge systems to sort of understand how we can, do the work of struggle and talk about African feminist leadership within the context of the histories that we find ourselves in. And I like I always say, I want to make sure that in this conversation, we are not participating in the erasure of African women. Recent times I've been working on a project that looks at the ways in which Ghanaian women were erased from the liberation struggle. So for example, Kwame Nkrumah, in his accounts of, the liberation struggle, would mention men by name and then just say the women helped and did this and so these nameless women, I want to acknowledge them today. So I think I'll stop now and hopefully I'll get to explore more of the things that I want to talk about today. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. There's a react button right below here, so please feel free to react to the comments that we're getting today and the conversations that we're having. Also, just a quick reminder that we have a Q&A function, so please feel free to drop in questions you may have, and we will get to those within a very short time. So next, we'd like to hear from Buhle. Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Irene. Firstly, before I even speak, I just want to let everybody know I'm definitely a little bit anxious. I'm quite accustomed to being in front of a live audience or even in front of a camera. It's quite intimidating to be staring into what kind of feels like a bit of a black hole, but having absolute faith that there are people there to receive it. Firstly, thank you so much for including me and having me as part of this panel discussion. I'm incredibly excited to be here, to be honest, mostly to learn, just because for me, as a young African woman, that's definitely been the thing that I've felt increasingly passionate about. And I think that our previous speakers said something very important that stuck out to me, and that was about community. And about it starting at home. So I am originally, my family is from the Northwest, and I come from a family where the women are activists, but what's really incredible is that goes from my grandmother, you know, who used to look after the entire village children, you know, everybody, to my aunt who would help educate this group of children in such and such a way, to my great aunt Ruth Mompati, who went into exile. So I understand it from different aspects, but I suppose by the time COVID came about, as I was saying, as a young Black girl, you know, I found myself going, what is womanhood? And then me and my friends all went, oh, so it's exactly what we suspected. It's a burden. That's what it feels like to us, you know. And the reason that it feels this way, I suspect in many ways, is because we found ourselves at this place where, okay, cool, there's no work. We don't know where to begin to find work. But then we started to realize how we have all of these tools and all of these histories of, you know, women who have made it happen before us, but for some reason, we don't know quite how to use those tools. So I would say that this time has definitely been one of me and, you know, the people within my community really trying to figure that out and trying to learn, and also trying to learn before we lose, you know, all of the people who have done it before us, and trying to figure that what that might mean. I think I've also found it, what's also been insane is to see some of my younger students really rise up. And what I mean by that is, I mean, I have 12-year-olds, between 12 to 17-year-olds who know exactly what to do. Or they don't know exactly what to do, but they seem to really be picking up the baton. And for a very long time, you know, I really thought that me as a now 30-year-old something, I thought that my generation, you know, the millennials would be the one to do something. But now it's been very humbling to find that, no, that isn't my job. My job is actually to grow and to try to become a better tree so that I can lift them to do more. And learning that has been insane. And also try to figure out what to do very much on the ground. Because I've seen, for example, I work with a group of 16 young girls between the ages of 12 and 15 in the Masiphumelele area in South Africa, and one queer boy. And they're absolutely incredible. And, you know, most of them had their homes burnt down, for example, about 2 months ago, let's say, in the middle of lockdown. And what was really insane was to see, you know, these young girls banding together and finding ways. And it broke me, but it also inspired me, and it keeps me working. I hope that I said something there. That's that for now. I think my 5 minutes is up.
No, you said a lot. You said quite a lot. And I really especially like the analogy that you've given of a tree, because I feel like we are all trees here. The way with which we live our lives, we're here to, elevate others or elevate others with everything that we're learning. And the way that we learn is how we water ourselves as trees. So thank you so much. That was quite insightful, and we appreciate that you shared that. Next, we'd like to call on Stella. Stella, you have the floor.
Right, so 5 minutes. I'm excited to be here, and with really powerful ladies. Also, the diversity of our panel is interesting. Currently, I'm in exile in Kenya. I fled from Uganda in January. And so the first thing I want to say is, what does COVID-19 mean for those of us who may be stateless and do not necessarily have government support systems? So for those of us who are migrants, forced migrants, illegal migrants, registered asylum seekers, or whatever, refugees in Africa, when Buhle talks about community, suddenly I don't have community, right? And I think the first issue that I want to introduce is how COVID-19 has shaken our understandings of community, because suddenly we could not bury our own. Suddenly we had patients in ICU units where we could not participate in care, especially if they were getting this in, the sort of treatment that needed quarantine. And so we were suffering and grieving alone many times. And I want to throw that out there, that often as women, we are looked as community enhancers. We are the ones that hold family together. But COVID-19 has disrupted that in very interesting ways, most of those of us in exile, right? But also I think people back home, because I was at home when COVID-19 started in March of 2020. Kenya is experiencing a second lockdown. The shutdown measures were introduced last night and they're supposed to start, right? And I think that curfew has implications about home. So what do street women, street men have to do in times of curfew, right? And in Uganda, we had a student who was murdered during curfew. The universities were locked down. He could not access his home up country. And security personnel, the police, shot at him and he actually died. He was a student who relied on dormitories that were shut down by a system. And the police shot at him. Right. So what does security and safety mean? What does curfew mean for those who are excluded from the agenda and the menu? And I think when Wunpini, is that how, Fatimata? I don't know how to say your first name. When you talked about exclusion, I mean, there are... Sorry? I missed that.
No, you're good. I said Wunpini. That's fine.
Wonpini, right? When you talked about exclusion, I was thinking, okay, they are the usual exclusions we've been talking about, but there are new structural exclusions that have been created by COVID-19 and are showing up how there are very many other minorities that are not excluded. I want to talk a bit about what Seehaam mentioned, praising our generational, the grandmothers for the caregiving they're doing. And I think that in terms of generation, COVID-19 has also shown that those grandmothers who are now caretakers are perhaps the most at risk, because there's something about age and older demographic COVID-19 transmission. And yet we have to rely on these grandmothers to do the care work, right? So in terms of thinking through the chances and opportunities, but also challenges that we have as feminists, as organizers, as critique thinkers, as scholars, as people who pass on the word, I think generational relations and the sort of upside downing or subversion of the work of women, older women, is becoming interesting. I think I also want to talk about young women who had to go to school, and because of COVID-19 and sexual violence, they are pregnant, and our school systems don't know how to deal with pregnant young women who have to report back to school sometimes for exams. We were given 5 minutes. Oh, I still have 1 more minute. And so I think in terms of nuancing our conversation, it's important that we question what has been our conventional wisdom. And in that regard, while women must be celebrated by feminists, I also want to call out those women who have privilege and are abusing their privilege in our parliaments, on our budgetary committees, as ministers of health, ministers sitting on COVID-19 task force, who are stealing money, who are passing policies that don't work for other women, who are responsible for the arrest and imprisonment and incarceration of fellow women in overstaffed, congested prisons and detention facilities without mass sanitization. Oh, what is it? Sanitizer, etc., etc. Not all of us women are good. Some of us women are terrible and horrible, and we are abusing our privilege, and we must call each other out. Ministers of health and ministers of gender who are taking advantage of COVID-19 monies that are being poured into our economies in Africa, and no one is calling them out. Where is the accountability? Where is the transparency? And it is women in power who are oppressing other minorities in Africa, sufferers, and are oppressing caregivers, health workers who don't have PPE. What is it? What is PPE? Personal protective equipment or whatever. And yet they could very simply work together to make life a little easier for those giving care, but also those of us who are suffering from COVID-19. And maybe the last thing in terms of introduction is the shame that accompanies mothers such as myself who get children who catch COVID-19. Where do we go? My son got COVID-19 in January, and I was so embarrassed. The stigma, other kids' parents did not want to come to my home, and I didn't know whether to hug my son or to shun him away. I wanted him to come to my bed and share that motherly warmth, but I was scared I matched COVID-19. And so the complexities of motherhood and mothering and just being a caregiver, I'm not saying I'm selfless, I'm very selfish. I don't want to catch a bug. But what happens to a woman when her very own son catches COVID-19? In terms of introducing myself and the topic, I think that COVID-19 gives us a very productive environment in which to think and do activism and do politics and do all these things we do as feminists. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being very candid in your opening remarks. We really appreciate that. And once again, thank you so much to our panelists for raising very pertinent issues that we're here to discuss and to talk about and, open and chart the path for each other. And I really like what Stella has talked about, holding each other accountable, because sometimes we have we end up leaning so much on what is common amongst us as women. And for us, feminists, we explain or we describe feminists in a very linear perspective, which is obviously, the fighting for our rights. But we also forget that fighting for our rights means fighting for our rights from those of us who look like us, but also oppress us. So thank you very much for raising these issues. And now, one more quick reminder that you're welcome. You're still welcome to put in the questions in the Q&A session, but we will move on to the next session of this particular panel, whereby we will ask a couple of questions by way of discussion to our panelists. And I will start with the first question that I think leans more towards what we've been talking about, what we've had all of our panelists talk about. And the first question is, why, in your view, is social reproduction excluded from economic development conversations in Africa? And then, within the same question, how do you think we could leverage COVID-19 as a critical juncture to introduce conversations around paying for the labor of social reproduction in Africa? So very quickly, just to describe and explain what social reproduction is. Social reproduction could be described as the process by which a society reproduces itself. So from one generation to another, the care that we give each other, or that women give their families, their husbands, to nurture their family, and to nurture each other. And so because of that, I will leave the floor to our panelists to respond to that.
I don't know, I'll go with regard to the social, I can speak to the issue around sexual health and reproductive rights too, but I think, I don't know if it's a two. I'll answer the second one with regard to the social reproduction, and I think, and I'm going to be very sensitive around, you know, what I know Dr. Stella said, don't say doctor, but I said that we shouldn't. We need to be able to understand also how community works, what is family, and what is the reconstruction in relation to that, and what has COVID done. There has been many challenges and during COVID and lockdown, and what has come up was the fault lines around issues on how violence impact on women, this socioeconomic rights, etc. And we are not taking those issues away. However, during this particular period, and I do think that the issue of data, the issue of access, the issue of during this particular period, in particularly for women, during this particular period, can also shifted many things. So, for example, within the private space, what has happened, for example, in some spaces is that, for example, in terms of religious gatherings, etc., we all know that women have always been placed within the home, within that particular space. And what has happened subsequently is that community women have even been created, because we all know that our churches, mosques, etc., have all been closed. So what does that look like? And women at the end of the day have always been subjected within a very particular environment, especially that they either couldn't go to mosque because of the patriarchal stereotypes in relation to women. And some of the opportunities that have come out is that how women have started rearranging and reinterpreting how religion is practiced within that particular private space, because they have always done it. And I think this is very important, because it's important for various rights, whether or not in terms of sexual health and reproductive rights, whether or not in terms of relationship rights, whether or not it's in terms of violence against women. It is very important to be able to recognize how women are organizing and how they organize during this particular period. And I think that is some of the social, maybe it's not a social reproduction, I do think it has always been there, but society for now had to start building on that which the women have brought through. And that production have ensured that women at the end of the day are the ones that provide food security. And the issue is right, what Stella said, it is not for them to be able to provide that. But for me, it's about ensuring that recognition is there, and it has brought to light what women have done and how they have kept those communities together. Also, in addition to that, how has women come together to be able to be that support for each other and to be able to pull each other, because we have always worked, or at least feminist leadership, feminists have always worked in that particular way. And I agree that there are challenges. Patriarchy has not touched women. But at the end of the day, for me, the focus has always been on development, and the focus is on how do we start building on the positivities that have come out of lockdown and COVID, because it is highlighted what women can do. And I'm just going to leave it there, because that is the reproduction that I'm talking about. It is the different communities that have been created, how family has been reconstructed, because we all know whether or not it is our sisters, cousins that also, reside within our space, whether or not it's different. The reconstruction of family has also changed. And I think because the focus, now we know it is about the maintenance, it is about ensuring that there is a basis for women to be able to ensure that other women are not just, I'm not talking about the organized, but other women are empowered as well as developed within that particular process. I know that I am probably saying a lot, but I have seen so many community women that have risen up, and also NGOs have not actually survived during this particular period, because there was a disjuncture between those NGOs and also what is happening in the communities. And I think those are all things that we should not lose, because the real power lies in our communities, the real agencies lies there, and how do we build on that? So Irene, I'm going to leave it. I know that we are going to speak about the Maputo Protocol at some point. Then I will speak about sexual health and reproductive rights. possibly just in terms of that context, be able to see what comes out from the protocol in relation to that. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Seehaam. Is there anyone else who would like to, in the panel, who would like to go on and answer any other section of the question? You can. I think Dr. Wunpini, I can see you already.
Yeah, so I'm just really happy that we are connecting this discussion to our current social reality. You know, COVID-19 hit, and you know, and something was that happened globally, and we noticed that it was the most marginalized people, you know, women who were affected. So, you know, working class women who were working as, you know, domestic workers, or who had jobs that required them to do a lot of like physical human contact, and it was really interesting to see the way that that was handled. So before I even go into that, I want to talk about the way that the gendered labor conversation that we've always had was amplified for women. So many women could not go out and work. They had children at home. And so they had to do a lot of domestic labor, which meant that, so, I mean, I read a bunch of studies which talked about how well men were doing, you know, professionally in their jobs, and how terrible it was for women who were just trying to survive because they had to do a lot of care work. And the people, it's even funny that, you know, I saw a lot of middle-class women complaining because the people who would come and do the work around the house couldn't be there to do the work for them. But I feel like when we talk about the way that labor is situated within these spaces, we also have to think about, like I said, the most marginalized women. So I was paying attention to how we were economically and educationally marginalized. So I did some work where I got to interact with women within the sector of education. And one of the things that I learned was that, you know, women who lived in rural communities, who were in colleges of education or training colleges, teacher training colleges in Ghana, have access to the internet or smartphones or laptops to be able to participate in schools. And it was even more pronounced for, you know, blind women and deaf women. And so for them, being in the physical classroom, it was, you know, not being able to be in the actual classroom was like a challenge for them because they didn't have like, you know, computers that could support their disabilities or technology that could support their disabilities for them to be able to participate in learning. And for rural girls, that was even more pronounced because that the whole idea of online learning was not even up for debate because of the digital divide that we have, you know, across the world. And specifically, I'm looking at the Ghanaian context where people in more privileged backgrounds could homeschool their children who were in households where their parents did not have formal Western education, were not able to, you know, stay up on top of these things. And at the end, when they come up for taking standardized exams, they're not going to ask whether or not you were able to study when everything was down, or whether or not you were able to catch up with your colleagues. And women also led a lot of work. So in Ghana, we had a very tiny budget, I believe less than $100 for public health campaigns for COVID-19 education. National Commission on Civic Education, which was supposed to be doing that sort of work, did not have a robust enough budget to do this type of work. And a lot of the education that we had in this area mostly focused on English, which is not the most widely spoken language in Ghana. And so there were women-led initiatives which came up with, you know, these projects where they found, for example, indigenous language radio journalists to record these public health messages, you know, video messages. They were doing, you know, audio messages to be able to spread on like WhatsApp, and even try and see if they could get them on the radio and on the TV so that these people could have access to this information. And we also noticed that there were a lot of African women who were doing work to address the misrepresentations and, you know, colonialist tropes that came out of all these conversations about Africa. There were people saying that there were going to be bodies in the streets of Africa. And then when Africa did, you know, well to manage the virus, because, you know, we come from a culture which is collectivist. And so we're always thinking about the person rather than just ourselves. And so we probably feel like you have to protect, you know, you have to follow the protocol so that you don't infect others. It's not just about you. So like, because of that cultural conditioning, many people took the virus more seriously. But then there was also the work that we constantly had to do to correct these misrepresentations. The time and labor that African women were doing to correct these misrepresentations could have been used to do, actual work, right? So you saw people coming out to explain why these things were going on, and also to draw attention to how these issues were affecting various people. So these public health campaigns were very good for people who didn't speak English, who spoke indigenous languages. And so it was great for sensitization. And then one of the things that I also noticed was that women in urban centers who were usually from working class backgrounds, who we call Kayayo women, they are headquarters. So they work in the markets in the cities like Accra and Kumasi, and they're usually women from the north of Ghana. They come there for greener pastures because, they are not from very strong socioeconomic backgrounds. And so they do a lot of labor, physical labor, where they carry loads for people who buy stuff in the market for a small fee. And so for these women, they were completely left out of this conversation, where nobody really cared whether or not they had places to sleep at night. Nobody cared whether or not they had access to, water to sanitize and all the things that they needed to stay, to protect themselves. And nobody cared if, they could go into lockdown, because Ghana went into lockdown for a bit. Nobody cared if they could go into lockdown without losing their livelihood and whether or not they could even survive in lockdown, because you can only say you're locking down and staying at home if you have food to eat at home, if you have water to drink, if you have all the things that you need. But if you constantly have to go out and get the money and then be able to buy food for the day, then that is something that is not even really up for debate. I mean, the government had various interventions by subsidizing water bills for people, but that didn't go as far as we would have expected. So these people were all really, really affected, and I believe that the COVID-19 pandemic demonstrated the stark inequalities that exist in our communities, and how horribly we are doing to address these specific inequalities in our communities.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Wunpini. As you were talking, I was actually just doing parallels to some of the things that I've not only read online, but that I've also experienced in my own country. I'm Kenyan, and a lot of what you're talking about is what I've seen in my country as well, which is such a sad shame, because we do have resources, we have leaders that have been elected, and obviously there's a very huge disconnect between these two things. And I'm really glad that we're here to have some of those conversations to see how we can bring the two together, so our leaders and what resources and what we as women can do to be able to provide better solutions to the people that look up to us. I don't know if there's anyone else who has something to add on the same question. Maybe Buhle or Stella, do you have anything to add on the question?
I don't know. I actually have some thoughts, to be honest, and I'm not sure yet if I'm going to be very articulate. So if you could just stick with me. But as you were speaking, Dr. Wunpini, I was firstly fantastic. Thank you so much. Exactly. That's what we say when we don't have the words. We just agree and go, yeah, exactly. Anyway, I was just thinking about Irene, thank you so much for explaining firstly what labor of social reproduction means. Just because I'd obviously gone to go and look it up to make sure that I understand. But as we were speaking about it now, I was also thinking it would be so incredible if this was something that was shared with more of us. If we understood just this basic definition, it would change so much, I think. Particularly from a young age, if we understood that this is what this labor was, and if we had the definition for it, we could respond. So sorry to go on about our mothers and our grandmothers again, but we would be able to respond in a far better way to our mothers and our grandmothers as to what it is that we're resisting. So what I'm getting at is, for me, I feel like a lot of what I've observed with myself, with my students, with, all of the young people that I work with, is there seems to be this tension now within the home also, or whichever space it may be, between daughters and mothers, or let's rather say an elder and a younger, and it does have something to do, as I said, this is just a comment, it does have something to do with what I pointed out earlier about us suddenly finding ourselves at this juncture where so much that we have to do, but we don't know how to do it. And now we know that what we do know for sure is that we resent our elders for making us do this job, especially because, you know, it's not like our history books are very helpful, but from the very little bit that we do get, it's very clear that we are not winning, you know, that there have been endless and endless and endless lines of women, you know, who have been doing this. So now we find, just to give a very silly example for it, but I find often that with some of my kids, you know, the thing that they resent in the home during COVID-19 is that now they're really feeling the pressure of having to be the one to clean up the house, having to be the one to keep everything tidy. And what does that do when you're the one that has to write an exam next week, but for some reason your family cares far more that your younger brother also has the exam? And now you resent the person that's telling you to do this thing. And you're like, why do I have to carry everything to contribute towards some wider thing that doesn't seem to ever land anyone who looks like me in a very good place? It just doesn't feel like fun to constantly have to work. I hope that made sense. Those are just some of the reflections.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, Buhle. And it is true. I think a lot of the reasons why it may be difficult sometimes to push for change, push for real, tangible and action is because we do not understand some of these things. For example, not understanding the term social reproduction, will keep us or may keep us from taking proper action from it. For example, in some countries, it is very clear that social reproduction is remunerated properly. And so how do we bring in conversations like this ones for us, for ourselves as African women, if we don't in the first place understand what this is and how it is remunerated? So thank you for sharing. Stella, do you have anything to add? Stella? I think I can hear you. Is it just speak? Can you hear Stella?
No, we can't.
No, we can hear you, Stella. Sorry. No, we still can't hear you. Amida, I'm wondering, are you able to help Stella in any way? Amida? Oh, no, it looks like it's a connection issue. Stella, are you able to turn off your camera maybe so we can see if we can balance it out?
Hello? Stella, if you can try to leave and come back into the session, and perhaps you'll be able to reload your account.
Okay, so Maxine is requesting Stella to log off and try come back on again so that we can try and load up your accounts. Stella, is that okay with you? Briefly log off, and then they can try and reset up your account again. Yeah, we still can't hear you, Stella. So we are suggesting if you could log off and then come back on again. Yeah, and then our tech team will try and load up your account again so we're able to hear you properly. Sorry about this. Okay.
Can you hear me? No?
Now I want to jump up and down. We can hear you clearly. Go for it. Thank you.
Oh, you can hear me?
Now we can hear you clearly.
Okay, so I'm not sure what happened. I didn't touch anything, but I was talking about social reproduction. Sorry about the time. And I was saying that in terms of replicating exploitative labor relations, right? That I think COVID-19 has highlighted how, very similar to what I think Buhle was saying, we don't know enough about particular sections of our communities. So the night economy, right? The night economy that depends on the hours when many of us retire to our homes, sex workers, cleaners of the streets, the informal sector of people who sell food by the roadside, and God knows whatever what. I think that COVID-19 has clearly shown that it's much more than gender. It's a lot about class and race and location, and we cannot afford to just do a gendered analysis. We must introduce issues around class, because an entire group, particularly in the urban areas that rely on electricity at night and the internet and are working in the night clubs and the cinemas and whatever else happens at night, their sources of income, informal and formal, were wiped out. Musicians, footballers, I mean, those are not women, but sportswomen, etc., etc., suddenly have no income. So there's the night economy, there's the leisure economy, there's the tourism economy, which often are not formal. They make money in informal ways and now don't have an income. And we don't even know what to do in terms of our social protection networks, whether it's microcredit or loans or social packages that are given by the government, because these guys are excluded, but they're not documented anywhere. There's no statistics on the informal sector, at least in the parts of Africa where I am conversant. And so how does one even begin to work with social reproduction in societies that have the dominant class, I'm not sure we have a middle class, but there's a class of some people and then everybody else. And then there are so many outside those layers who are never captured in the statistics that we have. And so I guess COVID-19 for me introduces new questions, interesting questions, but also for women such as myself who had to return home and work with laptops and do Zoom meetings, I found that very exclusionary. There are many women who cannot afford the internet or data. There are many people who don't have home space because they have children and other care activities. There are women whose homes have a phone that's owned by the husband, and he's not going to allow her to use the phone to work at home. And so I think for me that social reproduction as a theory, as a feminist framework of analysis, introduces new questions for us that are quite uncomfortable, especially for those of us who are privileged. And so the question about why don't we use this more often in our economic development discussions, I think it's because it's an invitation for us to be self-critical. You know, we are zooming, talking about Africa. Who else cannot afford to zoom with us?
Yeah.
We have electricity. How many others don't have electricity? And what does it mean in terms of go home and your homes are safe, the public is not safe? No, women have been raped and violated in the spaces of their homes. Go home and you're told to do social distance. Some of our homes are so crowded, we don't even know what social distance means at home, right? Our dining tables hold, I don't know how many people. How do we even talk about the meter that's required for social distance? And so I think that this framework in terms of feminist analysis demands that we go beyond just the gendered bodies, whatever genders we are working with, and we also introduce class. And I think for countries such as South Africa, race is another important section that we must add in order to dismantle this replication of very specific exploitative labor labor relations.
Equalities.
Yeah. So I'll shut up for now. Hopefully I won't close my microphone.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really deep to think about the fact that sometimes one of the reasons why these conversations are not had in public or in truth is because it requires a lot of self-reflection, which is very difficult for us as human beings. So, I mean, as we were talking about courage earlier and making other people and accountability for other people in government or other women in government, we are also calling for accountability for ourselves as well. So being self-critical as a way of trying to bring these changes in our community and to change and to look at it in a very layered way. So not just looking at it from a gendered perspective, but to look at other perspectives as well that Stella has so rightly mentioned. Thank you so much for that. We will move on to answering the final question very quickly before we jump into the Q&A session, because I can see quite a number of questions have been asked. And so this question says that the Maputo Protocol is celebrated for being one of the advanced gender equality human rights instruments. 18 years on, how impactful do you feel this charter has been in bringing forth meaningful change in practice? So I'm going to give us about 5 minutes each to just discuss and talk about this particular question. You have the floor. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm just gonna can I just jump in here? But I think it's
Sure.
important. There has been a note, besides speaking about the Maputo Protocol, that there was an approach. I see in the chat that they speak about the intersectional approach, and I think that when we speak about how do we, when Stella spoke about how do we deal with issues of race and class, orientation, etc., and to be able to ensure that when we deal with issues, that we need to be able to intersect all of those orientation, class, identities, to be able to ensure at the end of the day, whatever comes out at the other end, that there is substantive equality at the end of the day. And I think it's important because we all know that there has been major challenges. But just coming back to the Maputo Protocol, I think that just the Maputo Protocol in itself, I mean, we know that it came into existence in 2003. However, it's important to know that it's called the Maputo Protocol, but it's the African Union on the protocol and on the rights of women that was done in 2003. And I think that we need to be able to understand that. And so the protocol has been celebrated, obviously, as a radical human rights instrument, because it explicitly addresses a range of issues which hasn't been addressed before, in terms of sexual health and reproductive rights, in terms of context of HIV, in terms of abortion, health rights, etc. But also, in addition to that, the African Charter also complements CEDAW. There's a lot of theory, But the challenge that we've had is that, I'm the director of the Women's Legal Center, and some of the challenges is also about how governments actually implement the protocol and how does it relate to people on the ground, and we don't see that. Also, in addition to that, we need to be able to clarify, for example, the Women's Legal Center with other institutions like the Institute for Strategic Legislation in Africa, also the University of Pretoria. We made submissions to the Commission around certain provisions in terms of the Maputo Protocol that related to relationship rights. And the problem was that no judgment has been, because there was a technical interpretation that has been given. And so there hasn't not been attempts to be able to make submissions, to be able to ensure that the protocol in itself, there is a reality that women are not women are not, or is generally vulnerable persons are not accessing the rights that have been put in the Maputo Protocol. So the usefulness and the relevance of the Maputo Protocol needs to be looked at how states as well as government have implemented that on the ground, and we have not seen that. But I still have to say that it's a radical document. it still has a huge amount of protocols, comments, etc., that we can use both as legal activists and just broadly as activists. But the problem is that where are the accountability structures? Where is it that these activists go to be able to ensure that it's implemented at the end of the day? I'm going to leave it as that, because we have, and also the Maputo Protocol for us, even in South Africa, because we recognize international protocols, etc., within our in our interpretation of our particular laws. It is also a protocol that we can use, and we have used in many of our litigation before the Constitutional Court. And so for us, it is a lived document. It's a document that needs to be used, but we need to be able to know how we can use it. We also know from the Women's Legal Center side that the law can't, and I think maybe Buhle will come in here, is not maybe just a tool for social change, but we as feminist litigators do believe that the law can be used for social change. And so we will use, and we do use the Maputo Protocol within our litigation to be able to bring out what the government should do in relation to women, and where there has been a broad failure. So we have been interacting with the protocol and also other protocols and also international treaties, etc. But we need to be able to understand how does it impact on the women on the ground. So yeah, I'm going to leave it at that, Irene. It is something that we do use a lot. It's a radical document, but it is not filtering down in the communities. Thanks.
Thank you so much for sharing those wonderful insights, Seehaam. Stella, I think your mic is on. Would you like to share something?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Perfectly well, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so
you suffer PTSD from the previous incident? So sorry. We can hear you now.
I asked one of those women who refuse to be tech savvy, but anyway, Maputo Protocol, that one I can handle. I associate myself with everything that Seehaam has said. I think we select the protocol as a feminist who has been accused of being westernized because I studied at UCL and I studied at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, so very close to LSE. The Maputo Protocol, for us who also claim academic scholarship as feminists, allows us to enter feminism as Africans and say we even have a protocol under the AU, right? And I think for many African politicians, particularly patriarchs and misogynists who don't want to make life easier for African women, the protocol is important because it is African heads of states and it's been ratified by many other countries. Of course, domestication, as Seehaam said, is still an issue, so is implementation, but also ratification often means what, right? In terms of practical translation to the violated woman or the woman who needs actual abortion. I know that issues around abortion, so the Article 14 remains sticky in some of our countries where abortion is criminalized. Article 14 still remains a challenge and we haven't yet won on that one. But also I know that as an anthropologist, there are many people who introduce cultural relativism and issues around FGM, for example, female genital mutilation or female genital cutting or circumcision, from class 1 all the way up to class 4, infibulation, digging out the clitoris and sewing up the young circumcised woman. Some people, based on culture or religion, still make arguments that this is our culture, it has to be protected, there's nothing harmful about it. And so I think that the Maputo Protocol still has, we still have somewhere to go. It's not yet party time for us feminists who believe in almost every letter of every line of the protocol. I think I want to say that that sometimes it is blind, very, very blind to alternative genders, to third genders, to transgenders, to intersex people. And I feel it was very, very, very transphobic, very much working with the polarization of man and woman and female, girl and boy, and all other forms of women are excluded from the protocol, and maybe we need to do some more queering of these protocols that we have. But being the AU, it's a good beginning. It's not necessarily perfect or excellent. We still have a long way to go. Also, there are countries in Africa that haven't ratified it. I think, is it 3 countries now? I stand to be corrected, but I think some have not ratified, some have just signed, but some have neither signed nor ratified, and we need to get them on board as well. Thank you.
All made reservations.
Right. 6, my country, Uganda, signed with reservation. So did Kenya, Irene. So did Kenya. They signed. So did South Africa.
Yeah, there's a lot of
So did
reservations
South
that have been
Africa.
done.
Yeah, I mean, it calls to action on quite a lot. There's so much work to be done. Yeah, Dr. Wonpini, do you have anything to add? Sure, you're welcome.
Yeah, I always have something to say. If you leave me, I will just keep talking. So I just want to talk. I'm really thankful for the opportunity to learn from Stella and Seehaam more about the Maputo Protocol. I mean, I did some reading up on that and sort of tried to make connections to what we are dealing with in Ghana currently. So I'm very thankful for your mission to be able to learn from you. One of my issues, so I went through some of the articles and I was trying to see what that looks like in Ghana these days. So one of the articles, Article 12, which has to do with education, I was trying to see what that looks like. So Ghana has had some significant gains with regards to education. We've had an increase in girl child enrollment, in the country. But the problem with that is that, the kids enroll in school, but as you go up the educational ladder, there are fewer and fewer girls, so we're still struggling with the school dropout rates for various reasons. Either parents cannot afford, to pay for education at the high levels, or the kids don't even have access at all. Like there's so many structural and systemic factors that keep them oppressed in those ways. And as we were talking about it, and I was thinking about education just a few days ago, I got a message from someone in Tamale, which is where I'm from. I was born and raised in Tamale, Ghana. And they were talking to me about this little girl who was sent to the city to work with like an auntie or someone, a family member. And the promise was that she would be taken to school. She stayed with them. And so it ended up that they're just making her do, like, she's selling like water or something like that, and she's not going to school. So at the time that she's supposed to be in school, she comes to school to sell things to people who would be her class, right? So we still have a problem with enrollment rates even at the primary school level, even though we have education to be free at that level. And we still have pupils studying under trees in Ghana. So there's a wide disparity in the north and the south of Ghana, and especially between rural and urban Ghana, where you'll see that, we talk about our educational gains and the significant gains we've made to address educational access in the country, but we still have children studying under trees because they do not have school buildings. We still have children studying on floors because they do not have furniture. They write on the floors because they don't have slates and books to write on. So that's still a problem with regards to that. So even though there's a little bit of improvement in education, the disparities are still very much stark. And it's interesting to see how how intersectionality sort of manifests in that way. If you're a girl child, it's probably going to manifest differently in your lived reality compared to if you are a little boy. And also, I'm going to look at the Article 4 of the protocol, and which deals with the right to life, integrity, and security of a person. And in the past few weeks, there's been quite a lot of femicide happening in Ghana, where women have been victims of domestic violence at the hands of their husband. A number of women have been killed in their marital homes, and several of these domestic violence incidents have resulted in the murder of these women. We've also had, which I mentioned earlier, queer Ghanaians, queer and trans Ghanaians being attacked, physical, psychological, and emotional attack from the state since, I can remember, but it has been heightened in February and March because LGBT Rights Ghana opened a, community center for queer Ghanaians, and it has since been shut down, and queer Ghanaians have been the targets of violence, and this has been endorsed. And I want to say it on this platform, this violence has been endorsed by President Nana Akufo-Addo, because he has come out not to condemn any of what has been going on. The only thing he has said about that issue is that gay people or queer people will not get to marry, or they're not going to legalize queer marriages. He never said anything to the effect that said that people should stop physically, psychologically, emotionally harming queer people. And constantly their humanity is questioned in these spaces. And in 2020, it also talks about special protection for elderly women. So in 2020, a woman from Kafaba in the Savannah region of Ghana was lynched because she was believed to be a witch, or she was accused of witchcraft, and so she was lynched. And so we still have a lot of these things to deal with within that context, and not much has been done. There have been conversations about shutting down witch villages or witch camps, which might not necessarily be productive because spaces are sort of perceived as shelters for some of these women. So maybe we need to reimagine these spaces as spaces of refuge rather than as spaces where people who are banished and people who are stigmatized are put in. And so as we talk about things, it's important for us to contextualize them within our, sociocultural context and look to, the grassroots level to see if we can find solutions to these problems. And I also want to talk about Article 9, which, talks about political representation of women. And I'm sure Stella will speak to that, giving her experience in Uganda. But within the Ghanaian context, ideally, the election of feminists can be good for women and other marginalized people. I was very, very happy when Stella was running for Woman MP in Uganda. I was so happy, and I followed her journey. It was really amazing and inspiring, because a lot of the times we have women who run for these positions, but they tend to lose their way along the way, allow themselves to be co-opted into the system and become figureheads of the system. But with Stella, it was you still saw the the radical praxis coming through, and it was really inspiring to see that. And I hope that we see more of feminist politicians go this route. And women in politics also tend to be in some way pigeonholed and tokenized within the Ghanaian context that I know, and co-opted to push patriarchal values. So for example, the people pushing against the rights of queer people in Ghana, like a female MP is supporting a bill that will legitimize queerphobia in Ghana. So it doesn't necessarily mean that having women in power is going to change much, which goes back to echo what Stella was saying about how they can also, be oppressors. They can participate in further harming us. And so I want us to begin to think about focusing on dismantling oppressive systems that continue to oppress women, especially the most marginalized women. And then we also have to understand representation alone will not liberate us. Representation alone is not going to save us. And I'm just going to say this one last thing before I give it back to you, Irene. I'm talking about the personal is political, which I'm really interested in because I've read Bell Hooks a lot and I really enjoy Bell Hooks' work. So when we talk about the personal being political, we are not necessarily looking at political representation of women, but we are looking at how you can find value in theorizing and organizing from our lived experience to change the oppressive systems within which we find ourselves. And so for feminist scholars like me, autoethnography has been very useful, where I've been able to look into the histories of my, female ancestors to pull from the knowledge that they have produced to be able to shape my theorizing and understanding of feminism from an indigenous perspective. And the objectivity is a farce, because we have learned from scientific racism, scientific queerphobia, scientific misogyny and sexism, that science itself is not objective, and the idea that we can all speak from an objective perspective is not something that is possible. It's important for us to be able to theorize from our own personal experiences, connect them to the experiences of other people in our communities, and see how we can pull from that to be able to fight for our collective liberation.
Wow, thank you. So let me share one thing. I am really happy that this session is being recorded, because it will be very exciting to go back to listen to these conversations that we're having. It is important for us to listen to these messages over and over again, and to continue benefiting ourselves, grow into the beautiful, wonderful big tree that Buhle was talking about at the beginning of the session. So Buhle, do you have any probably final comments before we move on into the Q&A session?
Thank you very much. I agree. That's it.
All right, thank you. That was straight and quick to the point. Into our final session, I can see we have quite a number of Q&A, quite a number of questions in our Q&A session. And the first one is from Roberta Kisubi, and she directs this question to Stella, and she says, do you think Samia Suluhu Hassan's position as the first female president of an East African country, and that's Tanzania, represents a definitive pathway for real change for women? No, we can't hear you again, Stella.
No. Yes.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yes.
So I was laughing and not in a very humorous kind of way, but in a cynical way, to say that as a woman, as a feminist, as an East African, we celebrate that our statistics for women in politics have gone high. We have another woman as president. I think the 5th African president, right? That's female, after Ellen, the Liberian, Joyce Banda of Malawi. There were 2 others, I forget, right? So she's the 5th person. I celebrate that transition from President Magufuli, may his soul rest in peace, to Salima, has been peaceful. There was no firing of arms or kidnapping and abduction of people, as is happening in Uganda and other places where elections have just happened. It was peaceful transfer of power. Now, for me, is it representational? She was appointed not through elections. Their party, Chama cha Mapinduzi in Tanzania, is the party from which Magufuli came. And the law says that when he passes before the next election, his president becomes a president. Is it representational? The first question for me is, was she elected into office? Of course, it's legal because they followed the constitution, but is it representational? The one problem they have is that many vice presidents, particularly in East Africa, they're just flowers. Okay, a woman vice president is appointed as a decoration. She's appointed to fulfill the quota. She's appointed as some progressive window dressing, whitewashing, but often in terms of penetrating decision making, the women are either secretaries or they nod their rubber stamps of approval. And so I think the real question is that question about how effective she's going to be as a member of as the executive, as the president. I don't know. I know that she represents Zanzibar, she represents Muslim women, she represents Chama cha Mapinduzi. I don't know, because she was not elected by the masses into office, I don't know how representative her current presidency is. Celebrate her. And we are waiting to hear her telling Tanzanians to wear masks because COVID-19 is real. And so I think the bigger question should be, to what extent is she going to depart and change policy and practice and programs in Tanzania so that they are pro-people? If we have increasing COVID-19 in Kenya, COVID does not respect national boundaries. And I think the more important questions are around effective leadership, much than representational leadership.
For sure, for sure. Thank you for that, Stella. We will move on to the next question from Eliza. So I think we all know what's happening in Ethiopia currently, and Ila asks, how are feminists in Africa acting in solidarity with our sisters in Tigre region of Ethiopia? We are hearing of wanton rape and sexual violence every day. So what are
Shall I jump in again? Hi, Irene.
Sure, Stella. Thank you.
So
yeah, thank you. Thank you.
One of the things that Ethiopia says to us is that in terms of linkages, in terms of connection, in terms of solidarity and support, we have not done a very good job, most of us. And sometimes I wonder if it's about race. Sometimes I wonder if it's about a lack of understanding of what's happening locally in Ethiopia. And so Buhle's point about we don't know enough is important, that perhaps we don't get enough information. I also think that one of the ways in which we're fragmented as Africans is through language, and some of the Tigrinya writing that I've seen, I can't comprehend. I love the beauty of the characters, but I don't know the stories. Of course, there are stories that come through in English, but for me, I want to say that the Ethiopian story, for those of us who are in Africa but outside Ethiopia, challenges us to be more involved, to show up. If solidarity is indeed a virtue that we practice as feminists, we have not a very good job of holding our brothers and sisters and other relations in Ethiopia with love and just continuing to amplify their voices. I don't think we've done a very good job.
No, thank you. Because we are here to share our thoughts, so we are happy to hear what you think about it. I think I'll move on to another question from Akubude, who says, great presentations from you all. Thank you. How do you think the wives of governors and presidents in Africa and beyond maximizing the position of powers they are in to help solve gender inequalities? I think what they meant to ask is, how can they leverage their positions and the clout that they have to help solve gender inequalities? Over to you.
Well, can I just come in here? I think, you know, any government official, I do think it comes with privilege, it comes with responsibility, and it comes with accountability. And I think that if you need to be able to use that in a manner that changes the realities of those communities that have chosen you to represent them. And so even if we talk about the women that are the wives of, I think that they are women in their own right. And I think there's something that I really want to bring in here, is that it is one thing, I mean, there are many women that is sitting in parliament, in government structures, in, you know, in different structures. And yes, we can call them many things, but I think some of the issues that we also, there is also a broader responsibility, and people might not believe that, but for us, for example, if Stella goes to parliament, I do think that it is very important to be able to deal with the network, the culture, the toxicness, or the patriarch within that particular system. We need to be able to also support our women that are going forwards, those that want to make a difference. Because it's one thing to be able to leave them there in parliament and afterwards criticize. But if you are within a system, and I'm with a system that has been built by patriarchy, that is there for, I mean, you know, we need to be able to ensure that when we do, you know, put women in that particular system, how do we ensure that we support that system or its support, and also in that there's a broader network, because we are not one woman do it. Two women are not going to be able to do it. We need to be able to see how as a collective we are going to start deconstructing what has happened within our systems. And I think it's important that we need to be able to hold that space also, because it is in patriarchy's nature to be able to ensure also that we break each other down. And that is and this is not to be able to ensure that we are saying that we are going to tolerate bad behavior from any person. What we are saying is that when we start deconstructing what patriarchy has done within those systems, we need to build something else to be able to support women, for example, like Stella, that is going through the system. And I think we need to be able to see how we can do that in a manner that hold us all accountable, but also realizing that there is a system there that because I always say patriarchy is like a chameleon. You know, one, it changes, and we need to be able to see that women support each other through that system. I think that is very important.
Thank you so much, Seehaam, for saying that. Sorry, Dr. Wonpini. I really like what you said. I really like what Seehaam has said, that it's in patriarchy's interest to make sure that we've broken each other down. And then I also want to tie that with what Stella talked about, the importance of us looking at this from a very intersectional perspective, and also say that it is elitists, the elites also work to ensure that we are also, breaking each other down or bringing each other down. So having a very a different way of looking at it also is quite helpful. So Dr. Wunpini, you have.
That's fine. No, I wanted, I'm really glad that Seehaam gave us all of that context and, talked about the ways in which all these women can do the work. And I am particularly cautious of, thinking about the role that these women can play, because, history, when we look back in history, the wives of presidents have tended to monopolize like the gender advocacy movements in their countries. They've tended to monopolize the feminist movements in their countries and they have co-opted these feminist movements to serve their party interests or their individual interests. So I'm going to use Ghana as an example, as I've always done. And before I go into that, Amina Mama and other African feminist scholars have talked about the notion of femocracy, which is basically, women coming, for example, which can be connected to the First Lady syndrome, where the First Ladies of African countries are not necessarily espousing radical politics, and even when they get involved in feminist work or gender work, they tend to undermine the work that radical activists are trying to do. But some have also tried to use it to do certain things. So, for example, in Ghana, Nana Konadu Agyemang-Rawlings, the wife of the late J.J. Rawlings, she started the 31st December Women's Movement. And, when some feminists sort of try to understand the usefulness of this movement, helping with education for women, helping women to be able to have access to like vocational training and all of that. But also we should understand that this type of help and support was sort of limited to women in her husband's political party. So it was the women in the NDC who tended to have access to these things, these sort of resources to be able to empower themselves. And I grew up seeing women who were like hardcore members of these parties benefit tremendously from the 31st December Women's Movement, and women who were not part or who did not affiliate with that political party not necessarily benefiting from that. So historically, these the wives of these presidents and leaders they've not had a good track record with regards to fighting for the liberation of all women, or for the liberation of women who are not necessarily in their political parties. So that's just something that I wanted to add.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think, unfortunately, we may not be able or be in a position to get to all the questions in the Q&A session. However, I'd like to refer you to our program, which does have I think contact addresses for our panel speakers today. It's been really amazing hearing from them, and I'm sure we have so many varied questions that we may want to ask and thoughts and ideas that we may want to share. So I'd like to encourage you to feel to reach out to them. I'm very sure they will not mind continuing with these conversations, because we are quite restricted with time. We could sit here all night and listen to Dr. Wunpini and listen to Stella and listen to Buhle and listen to Seehaam. But thank you for the time that you've shared with us. I would like to give each and every one of us just about a minute to share their final thoughts, and then we close up the session. 1 minute, please.
I'd just like to say thank you very much for having me, and also thank you so much to the panelists for teaching me so much. I'm incredibly excited to get back on the ground, and in particular to start making sure that I implement lived documents. Really appreciated your saying that, Seehaam. Thank you.
Thank you, Buhle. Irene, I just wanted to say that, and I'm going to pick up what Dr. Stella said also around issues of sex. Let history also celebrate, during this period, that we acknowledge that the sex workers who worked tirelessly during this period to educate her community about the health implications of COVID-19. That is in our context also, because we work very closely with organizations that speak to the decriminalization of sex work, and it's also cases that we have taken to court. And let history also celebrate the thousands of community healthcare workers who knocked on the doors and experienced abuse and prejudice as they assisted with all of those screenings and also ensuring that there's food on the table. The women of 2020, I have to say, did not for a government to lead. They walked past failing states with their heads up held high, and they led their countries, I would say, and this is not romanticizing. I'm saying that they created the feminist realities that we have always been working for, and we need to be able to build on that, because we need to remember as history unfolds that it was the women of 2020 that stood and ensured that women, children, communities are fed at the end of the day. And I think that we should never forget that. When we talk about participation, we talk about representation, and we talk about leadership, let's not forget that they created their own feminist realities. So thank you very much for having me, and thank you for everybody on this panel. It was really great speaking to you, and I hope that we will continue these conversations in different forms, different formats into the future.
Dr. Wonpini?
Yeah, so I just want to thank you all for such a stimulating conversation, and thank you for this platform to be able to have this, national, continental conversation on African feminisms. I'm so grateful to be able to learn from all of you, and I just want to acknowledge that, we have feminist organizations that are doing work around queer organizing in Ghana, like One Love Sisters, which is an LGBTQ Muslim organization. You can check out their work. The South Majority Ghana is also doing really great work to address the violence that queer Ghanaians are experiencing these days. So I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. I will move on to Stella. No, we can't hear you, Stella. Oh, that's all? Oh, what a sad end. I'm so sorry that it has to end like this. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's quite unfortunate that we can't hear you, but thank you for joining us today. I'm giving you all a standing ovation, and thank you so much to our audience. We really hope that you learned quite a bit, as much have. So round of applause as we end, and we really appreciate this. Thank you.